Hello and welcome to another episode of Gumzo Cybersecurity Podcast. Every major cybersecurity incident begins with a vulnerability. However, not every vulnerability turns into an incident. Today's episode is about ethical disclosure and also known as responsible or coordinated vulnerability disclosure, and why it is one of the most critical yet misunderstood practices in cybersecurity. Let's define ethical disclosure. Ethical disclosure is the practice where a security vulnerability is reported privately to the system owners or vendors of a system or hardware. It comes with sufficient technical details and a reasonable timeline provided for remediation before any public disclosure is done. So this process balances three competing interests. Number one is the public safety. Number two, research freedom. And number three, organizational risk. You get the balance wrong, and you either expose the users to attacks or suppress legitimate security concerns or research. Let us discuss where ethical disclosure fits in cybersecurity. So, ethical disclosure lies at the intersection of vulnerability research, incidents prevention, legal and regulatory compliance, and organizational trust. It is not a nice to have or an add-on with regards to matters compliance and governance. The core control in vulnerability management and governance. It is a core control in vulnerability management and governance. Essentially, what we are discussing today is vulnerability management. And we are saying we have this animal called ethical disclosure. And the disclosure comes in various forms. So we have, in two broad forms, we have full disclosure or responsible disclosure. Though we can have others that we can explain, but ethical disclosure will fall into those two critical parts. Either it is full disclosure or responsible disclosure. Full disclosure is releasing information to the public with regards to a vulnerability in full details without much of a worry of the harm that information might cause if it fell into the wrong hands, like adversaries. Whereas responsible disclosure, the right information for only the right information for informed decisions to be taken. You see here, you have not given all the information in full detail. Full disclosure gives all the information, including sensitive data, whereas responsible disclosure does not, or it does not give sensitive data. It only gives information that is enough for sensible decisions to be made. Let us go into details about full disclosure. So here, vulnerability details are published immediately to the public. The pros are it forces the vendor to act swiftly. The cons are that it could enable immediate exploitation of that vulnerability in the event that that information fell into adversarial hands. So this model of full disclosure, it made sense in early internet era, but it is quite risky today because you do not require a lot of effort to weaponize that kind of information. In fact, in the advent of artificial intelligence and in the advent of generative adversarial AI. So let's look at responsible disclosure in detail. So this involves private reporting in major cases with a remediation window given. So typically, it would be released to a company, this vulnerability, and there would be a time frame, say 30, 60, or 90 days, and then a public disclosure is made only after a patch has been developed and deployed. So this kind of approach is widely accepted across the industry. Then we have a coordinated vulnerability disclosure, or a CVD. This we had not mentioned earlier. So a CVD involves multiple parties coordinating and on how to handle this vulnerability disclosure. So you have a combination of researchers, vendors, and cyber emergency response teams. So this is now the best practice. It is the recommended best practice in the industry. When you look at compliance standards such as NIST, ISO, RT, CC, all these are recommending a coordinated vulnerability disclosure. Then finally, we have a non-disclosure or exploit sale. So this involves vulnerabilities that are sold or weaponized without even notifying the vendor or the affected developers. So this is essentially not ethical, and it is part of the threat economy. People profit without caring the impact of that vulnerability exploitation. Let us look at the ethical disclosure in regards to the vulnerability lifecycle. Vulnerability lifecycle involves discovery, reporting, triage and analysis, remediation, and disclosure and transparency. Disclosure and transparency, you can see, comes last with regards to the life cycle of vulnerability. Remember, we said a vulnerability, it's a flaw or weakness in software or hardware that either the vendor has discovered or has been reported to the vendor by an external party, such as a researcher, right? So let's look at ethical disclosure in vulnerability lifecycle. So number one, the first step in vulnerability lifecycle is discovery. So discovery, here a vulnerability is identified via either penetration testing, bug bounty research, internal testing, or open source code reviews. So when you go through the code that has been written in your organization and you discover, here we have a hole, we have a weakness, that is a source of discovery. Ethical responsibility at the stage of discovery entails minimal exploitation, no data exfiltration beyond proof, no service disruption at this critical juncture. So the principle here is least harm. Then we can go to the second stage, which is reporting. An ethical report includes a clear reproduction of the steps that you went through. If it's a code review, how did you go through it and arrived at a particular conclusion? If it is a penetration testing, these are the steps that you took to come to a conclusion that this is a vulnerability. And then the other thing in reporting is that the report includes the affected system and version. The report also, you also have evidence without sensitive data exposure. So we said an ethical report will include clear reproduction of steps followed to arrive to that particular conclusion that this is a vulnerability. Then an impact analysis. You could explore now the CIA triad, how it has been trivialized or how it has been impacted by this vulnerability. What makes this a vulnerability, right? Then you could look at the affected system and versions, and in that report you could have evidence without revealing sensitive data. So organizations must provide disclosure policies, security contact, and safe harbor assurances. Otherwise, without those, now you push researchers to release the information publicly. So for the reporting to happen in an ethical manner, give assurances that you're not going to sue. You are a safe harbor for vulnerability reports. Again, you have a very clear disclosure policy, and you have established security contact channels that if we find a vulnerability, this is how we reach out to you, and this is how that information is disbursed to your security teams. Then let's go to, just before we go to the triage and risk assessment stage or life cycle stage of vulnerability life cycle, I would want to mention that if you lack those three elements of a disclosure policy, security contact channel, and safe harbor assurance, then the researchers will be compelled or will be left guessing on the next course of action. So let's go to triage and risk assessment. And this is a critical stage because this now enriches this vulnerability. So once the vulnerability report is received, the organization must must acknowledge the receipt, must validate the finding, and assess exploitability. You cannot leave, in fact, the assessment of exploitability will also be done by other parties, as we said, these security researchers. Once you assess exploitability, then you can also prioritize based on risk. And in fact, in vulnerability management, this is where now you assign a risk profile to this vulnerability. This is how you say how severe this vulnerability is. This is where you assign a score. So we have something called a Common Vulnerability Scoring System, a CVSS, that essentially assigns a score, a severity score of this vulnerability. And most of the time it will come from, remember we've said at this point we are assessing exploitability. If this vulnerability is exploitable, highly exploitable, and is affecting critical functionalities of a system, then it will be assigned a higher severity score. So ethical failure at this particular stage involve ignoring the reports that have been submitted to you as an organization, legal intimidation, and downplaying severity. This is where many disclosure relationships break down. Let's go to the next stage of vulnerability life cycle, and this is remediation. So here, ethical remediation means fixing the root cause and not just the symptoms, right? So here you also communicating the timelines for fixing this vulnerability. You are applying temporary mitigation if needed. If it's extremely an urgent situation, then a temporary mitigation might be very feasible. So for critical vulnerabilities, again, emergency change, you could have a window where you're saying, we may not be able to ship this particular system as it is, or this version as it is. We are shifting. We are shifting. We are having emergency change windows, right, for this particular product. Then you could have out of band patches that are unplanned for. So if usually you'll have patches every 3 months, then you could have this one in a week or two, right, to remediate the situation. So security is not ethical if it's perpetually delayed. On the other hand, now, if you have a report, you have a vulnerability, and it causes incidents, then yourself, in managing that vulnerability as an entity subject to a particular software or hardware, you're not acting in good faith and you're not ethical. Let's go to the last stage, which is us now to this discussion, which is disclosure and transparency. I've had a lot of people talk about if a bank received, they may not be able to disclose just for the fear of a run or a reputational damage. But indeed, it behoves you, if you're an ethical entity, to give proper information to your customers and tell them, indeed, there are this vulnerability of this nature, but it has been contained. And that's why we are saying we have a life cycle for vulnerabilities. So, disclosure. Here, after remediation, the CVE may be published, of course, for researchers and other people who may want to come and learn. Advisories may be issued to your clients. Tell them, we may never do these or these or these. And due to these, we are saying that we have closed this particular channel and you'll be using channel A and B. That is advisories. Then you could have researchers credited. If this was not your internal discovery, whoever discovered this should be credited with that. And then you should also inform your users. So the strength that comes with a disclosure stage and transparency is industry-wide defenses are reinforced. Then you have a shared learning experience across your industry, and you also reinforce public trust. So that is the life cycle of vulnerability management. And that is the ways disclosure ethical can be approached. So remember, we said we have full disclosures. These ones will give into so much details about the vulnerability, running into a risk of further attacks or exposing your users to harm. And then you have responsible disclosure. You are only giving the right amount of information for informed decisions to be taken. On the other hand, we have coordinated vulnerability disclosures. These involve a of stakeholders, researchers, vendors, cybersecurity, emergency response teams. And then we have non-disclosure, where a bad guy will notice a vulnerability and they will weaponize it. They will not disclose it to you. They will sell it in the black market. Now, this issue of ethical has been provided for in various standards, and various standards try to align to it. We have the ISO 27001 that speaks to vulnerability management and incidents prevention. We have the ISO IEC 29147. It talks about vulnerability disclosures. ISO IEC 30111 talks about vulnerability handling. NIST SP 840 speaks to patch management. The NIST SP 853 speaks to RA and SI control families. So therefore, the key takeaways of this discussion are that ethical disclosure is not about protecting a reputation. It is about reducing your risk before attackers act. When done correctly, it prevents incidents, builds trust, improves security maturity, and protects users and infrastructure. So in the next episode, we'll examine how tools like Faraday, Defect Dojo support ethical vulnerability handling, and how ethical disclosure becomes operational and not just theoretical. Until then, find responsibly, disclose ethically, and secure deliberately. That has been Gumzo Cybersecurity Podcast. My name's Francis Mwangi. It's always a pleasure.